Bore da i chi gyd, a diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am ymuno gyda ni ar gyfer ein gwemyna heddi i baratoi i darparu'r cymhwyster dilyniant mewn Plastro Soled a Leinio Sych Gosod. Good morning to you all, and thank you very much for joining us in our webinar on how to prepare to deliver the progression qualification in solid plastering and dry lining and fixing. Rydym yn gweithio o adre, felly ymddeiriadau ymlaen llaw am unrhyw sŵn yn y cefndir ac unrhyw oedi yn y sleidiau. We are all working from home, therefore I apologise in advance for any background noise and any delay in the slides. Dyma'r 8fed webinar ar y meysydd masnach unigol ar gyfer y gymhwyster dilyniant. Gallwch gyfrestru ar gweddill y gwebinarau yma ar wefan Sgiliau i Gymru. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd am ymunodd yn y gwebinarau ar gyfer y sylfaen. Mae bob recordiad ar wefan Sgiliau i Gymru. This is the 8th in a series of webinars on the individual trade-specific areas for the progression qualification. The links to register on all the remaining webinars can be found on the Skills for Wales website. Thank you to all who joined the Foundation webinars. All recordings can be found on the Skills for Wales website. Fe fyddwch yn derbyn e-bost cyn diwedd y webinar gyda linc i'n harolwg a'r pwynt pŵer yma yn y Gymraeg a'r Saesneg. Byddem yn ddiolchgar iawn gyda chi'n cymryd yr amser i lenwi ein harolwg, gan bod eich adborth yn werthfawr iawn i ni. You will receive an email before the session ends with a link to a survey and also this PowerPoint in both English and Welsh. We would be very grateful if you could take the time to fill in this survey, as your feedback is very valuable to us. Dyma beth fyddwn ni'n mynd trwyddo bore yma. Fe fyddwn yn esbonio pam mae gennym ni y gymhwysterau newydd yma, ac yna'n edrych ar gynnwys y gymhwyster dilyniant, gan edrych yn benodol ar Plastro Soled a Leinio Sych. Fe fyddwn yn edrych ar strwythur yr unedau ac yn rhoi amlinelliad o'r asesiadau. Yna fe fyddwn yn edrych ar yr adnoddau a fydd ar gael i chi, cyn symud ymlaen at y camau nesaf. Yna fyddwn yn edrych ar y trefniadau trosiannol sydd ar gael i chi, ac i gloi, fyddwn yn rhoi y cyfle i chi ofyn unrhyw gwestiynau. Plis rhowch eich cwestiynau yn y tab Cwestiynau sydd ar y llaw dde o'ch sgrin. This is what we'll be going over this morning. We'll be briefly going over the transformation of these new qualifications. We will look at the progression qualification content, looking specifically on solid plastering and dry lining. We will look at the structure of the units and the outline of the assessments. We will then have a look at the resources available for you before moving on to the next steps. We will then take a look at the transition arrangements that are in place. And then there will be an opportunity for you to ask us any questions that you may have. Please type in any questions that you have throughout this webinar in the Questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen. Fe fydd y cyflwyniad yn para tua awr, gyda hanner awr i ateb cwestiynau. The presentation will last around an hour, with 30 minutes for questions. Dyma i chi eich cyflwynwyr heddi. Here are your presenters today. We have David Pye, who's the Technical Advisor for Building Services for City and Guilds. Also have Ian Roberts, who's the Technical Advisor for Construction at City and Guilds. And myself, Angharad Lloyd-Bainan, I'm the Business Development Manager for City and Guilds for Wales. Nawr, fe gawn ni pôl sydyn i wybod am eich dealltwriaeth chi am y cymwysterau newydd yma. Now we will have a quick poll to get your understanding of the new qualifications. Please rhowch eich lefel y dealltwriaeth gyda 5 yr uchaf. Please give your level of understanding with 5 being the highest. Felly sut byddwch yn disgrifio eich dealltwriaeth o'r gymhwyster dilyniant, dyle hwnna weid. Felly rhowch 5 fel eich ateb uchaf. How would you rate your understanding of the progression qualification, that should say, and if you put 5 as the highest? So 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. Wnawn ni roi ychydig o eiliadau i chi. Felly gadarnhau, ni siarad am y gymhwyster dilyniant fan hyn. Just to confirm, we are talking about the progression qualification here. Diolch yn fawr i chi. O hyd yn gweld hyn yn ddiddorol i weld y chlefyr o dealltwriaeth, ac mae'n siŵr erbyn diwedd y webinar fydd well dealltwriaeth gyda chi am y gymhwyster dilyniant. Thank you very much. I was finding it very interesting to see your results, and I'm sure by the end of this webinar you will have a greater understanding of the progression qualification. Os wnawn ni nawr edrych yn gyflym ar pam mae'r cymwysterau yma yn dod i Gymru eleni. We'll now take a quick look then at why these new qualifications are going to be coming to Wales this year. So in February 2018, Qualifications Wales published the Building the Future report, which was a sector review of qualifications and the qualification system in construction and the built environment in Wales. The report summarised the views of learning providers and a range of professional representative bodies, together with more than 100 employers and over 900 learners. It included findings from their own review, a sample of qualifications, and an international comparison study. Qualification Wales's outline findings were that there were inconsistent assessment practice, assessment is often not well managed and quality assurance can be inconsistent, with some areas of learnings not effectively assessed. There was a need for learners to be able to deal with a range of tasks and be able to problem solve, which we have incorporated into the new qualifications with aspects such as planning and evaluation skills. There was also a need that qualifications needed to meet the skills needs of Wales, such as heritage buildings, traditional materials, tools and techniques, and how they have changed over time. I also found the need to rationalise the amount of 400 plus technical and vocational qualifications in the construction and built environment sector, and the need of having coherence in these qualifications. And also they found the need to keep portability between the nations. So the consortium of EAL and City and Guilds have been working with sector bodies to facilitate this and using recognised standards for each trade. So whilst doing this, we have been speaking to a lot of stakeholders. So the content for these new qualifications has been developed in conjunction with a number of stakeholders. We've been speaking to technical consultants from across Wales, technical working groups and forums, such as various focus groups, stakeholder forums, and also BARC. Also been working with current practitioners across Wales, and also speaking to industry, including micro, small, medium, and large contractors across the sector. And all this has been done through the agreement with Qualifications Wales. On this slide, it's just show you some questions that you may have. As I mentioned earlier, you will be having a copy of this PowerPoint. So it's just a useful slide for you to be able to refer back to. It just entails what the progression qualification covers. And on this slide, it shows you the progression qualification for different learners. So option A, so a learner would complete 1 year in full-time learning before securing an apprenticeship. Option B, that a learner would complete 2 years in full-time learning before securing an apprenticeship. And option C would be a learner would have direct entry onto an apprenticeship. The apprenticeships will be going live in September 2022. The foundation qualification is the entry point for learners who wish to start their journey towards occupational competence in a construction or building services engineering trade. The progression qualification has been designed as an optional second year for learners to do after the foundation. It is particularly useful as a meaningful programme of study in full-time education if a learner has not secured an apprenticeship place. Hoffwn nawr eich trosglwyddo i David Pye a fydd yn eich tywysg trwy y sleidiau nesaf. I would now like to pass you over to David Pye, who will take you through the following slides. Diolch, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne Harrod, and welcome everyone. We would like to introduce you to the joint branded documents related in this progression qualification. The qualification handbook is a starting point and contains information on staffing, resources, summary of assessments, and qualification content. You will also have an assessment pack and a project pack which gives in-depth information on the assessment requirements, such as centres practicals, resource lists, how to conduct centre assessments. These will also be available in the Welsh language and will be available shortly on the consortium website. So now let's consider the important rules of combination. There are 3 core units, which are 201, employment and employability in the construction sector. Typically, this unit will cover things such as trade-relevant bodies and organisations, the main principles of self-employment, importance of personal skills, solving problems within their scope of responsibility. And then Unit 202 is changing practices over time. Typically, this unit will cover changing construction and built environment sector, the changes in the construction materials, the tools and the techniques over time, the relationship between trades and the environment, and connected practice between construction and building services engineering. And then the final core unit is 203, which is planning and evaluating work in the construction sector in Wales. This unit will cover how to calculate costs and determine resource requirements, planning of work, and the importance of evaluating that work. Then there are trade-specific units, which we can see on the following slide. So here we have Pathway F, solid plastering. There are the 3 core units we've discussed, but in addition, we have plastering core knowledge, internal solid plastering finishes, and applying solid render to background surfaces and producing finishes. Pathway G, dry lining. Again, the same 3 core units, but then dry lining core knowledge, installing dry lining systems, and installing plasterboard and mechanically and by direct bond. So, as we can see, the total GLH is 540 hours. This is the time the average learner is anticipated to study and be assessed under supervision. This is broken down to 100 hours for the core, 378 hours for the pathway, and 62 hours for the assessment. TQT, which is total qualification time, also factors in any additional time a learner will spend on their own study, doing things such as revision and reinforcement. So the total qualification time is 600 hours, which is 60 credits. So now I'd like to pass you back to my colleague, Ian, to take you through the next section. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, David and Anne Harrod, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'd now like to take you and take a look through into the actual units and the structure themselves. There is always a temptation to look at assessments and work backwards to delivery. But if we consider the qualification handbook and the details in the units, we will get a full outlook of the content to be delivered. I'd like, first of all, just a gentle reminder that the learning outcome is the overview, The assessment criteria start to detail what outcome is expected for successful assessment, and the range indicates the breadth of knowledge and skills to be covered. All elements of the range must be covered in the delivery. The unit we have highlighted here is Unit 202, which is changing practices over time. The top of the page will always show the unit number and title, the guided learning hours, which in this instance is 45. It then goes on to describe a brief overview of the unit, and in this instance it is for learners to gain knowledge and understanding of how materials, tools and techniques have changed and adapted from 1919, as well as looking to the future. This is something tutors delivering this content may have to carry out additional research or CPD to update their knowledge and understanding. However, this is no different to what we have had to carry out previously when we had to teach new content. Immediately below, you will then see the learning outcomes, and in this instance, it's learning outcome 1. Just a gentle reminder that when we go through the additional units, you will see that the titles of learning outcomes 1, 2 and 3 are the standardized same titles throughout all the units and also the pathways as well. One key difference compared to current qualifications is that we tend not to use active verbs such as state, explain and describe in the criteria. This was to enable the content to be assessed in various different ways, but the depth of content in the section as shown in the blue box on the next slide will give you a good description as to what depth needs to be taught. Following on from the previous slide, we can see the learning outcome discussed on the previous slide. And then we've got learning outcome 2. And this is know the changes in construction methods over time. And when we look at criteria 2.1, we can see the heading pre-1919 construction methods, and the range is immediately beneath. We then build up to 2.3, which is the 21st century construction techniques and technologies. We could then ask ourselves, what does this cover? And this is where we consider the range, off-site manufacturing, prefabricated construction components, 3D printing of construction components, etc. Then we can ask to what depth. The depth in the lower blue box describes further the expected outcomes. So let's take a closer look at 2.3, which states learners will know emerging methods of construction for 21st century buildings. This should include the materials, tools and techniques relevant to their chosen trade, etc. The depth of content is there to provide you with the information you will require to the depth of coverage that will be required. I'm now going to help reinforce the message from the previous slide and to show how construction is considered in the solid plastering and dry lining pathways. And we will first of all take a look at Unit 226, produce internal solid plastering finishes in the solid plastering pathway. As you've seen previously, you can see a brief description on what this unit is about. It covers preparing and applying 1 and 2 coat plaster to internal backgrounds. And at the bottom of the slide, there is the learning outcomes 1, 2 and 3. And as I've mentioned previously, the same learning outcome titles are the same across all pathways. Moving on, again we can see the same layout, and following on from unit, the previous slide we've mentioned, we can see learning outcome 3. Comply with given contract information to carry out the work safely and efficiently to the required specification. Criteria and range to cover for 3.1 is prepare background surfaces to receive 1 and 2 coat internal plaster to given work instructions. Then in the blue box, as previous slide, you can see the delivery outcome in more depth. In 3.4, learners will be able to use suitable and correct methods for carrying out pre-checks for background surface. They will be able to use correct techniques and application methods to gauge, mix and prepare blended lightweight plasters to the right consistency. To help cover the additional unit so we can cover the dry lining, which is the fixing, here we can see unit 229. And once again, you can see a brief description on what this unit is about, and it covers selecting and using materials, components and equipment whilst preparing, installing and repairing proprietary dry lining systems. At the bottom of the slide, there's once again the 3 learning outcomes 1, 2 and 3. Again, we can see the same layout, and following on from the previous slide, which was unit 229, we can see learning outcome 3. The criteria and range to cover for 3.2 includes fixing deflection heads, forming openings and junctions, and carrying out repairs to given work instructions. Then in the blue box, once again, you can see the delivery outcome in more depth. And for 3.2, learners will be able to carry out different installation methods that will include metal stud, single, twin and staggered, etc. It is worth noting at this point that the criteria and range to cover is extracted from the occupational competency statements set by industry. And this is to enable a smooth transition when the learner is successful in gaining employment and then moving across to work towards the level 3 qualification. Moving on, I would now like to take a closer look with you at assessments. The progression qualification is assessed using 3 assessment methods, which is very similar to the foundation qualification. We start with the on-screen assessment, externally set and externally marked, with an overall weighting of 20%. And this will consist of multiple choice questions. The practical project will now cover 1 trade pathway, the pathway that they will be working towards, which is externally set, internally marked, with a weighting of 60%. And the guided discussion is externally set, internally marked, with a weighting of 20%. As many learners prefer hands-on experience, this weighting of assessments will identify and reward demonstrated skills within the practical project. And we will be going through each method of assessment in the up and coming slides. But before we move on, I would like to reinforce that we will have an assessment pack detailing with the requirements of the assessments, which will be available to be downloaded from the Skills for Wales website commencing the 10th of May. The reasons that it will not be available until that date is that all resources and material have to be in the Welsh language as well as English before they can be uploaded onto the Skills for Wales website. For each pathway, we're now going to cover, and this will cover for each pathway, the on-screen assessments, and they cover the 3 core units, and is 70 minutes long and contains 45 questions. It is recommended that this is taken prior to the practical and guided discussion. Regarding the practical project, each pathway is made up of 3 tasks that require the learner to plan, perform, and evaluate. And this is to be taken before the guided discussion. The guided discussion, again, is within each pathway, and it contains 2 parts, including the learner's reflection on the practical project. And this method of assessment is externally set, internally marked, and externally verified. And the guided discussion can only take place once the learner has completed the practical project. The health and safety is not part of the qualification, and I would like to remind people that this is also not mandatory. It is to allow the learner to move forward in readiness to carry out the CSCS health and safety test to gain the relevant CSCS card, and can be taken at any stage of the assessment process, although this may have already been taken while working towards their foundation qualification. The content within the qualification covers all aspects of learning required, which means that no additional learning is required. So the learner could step straight in and complete the 6072 Health and Safety Test Award to be able to move on accordingly. Here we can see examples of a selection of the questions from the on-screen test for solid plastering and the dry lining pathways. Some are straight multiple choice, some are drag and drop, and others are pictures asking a learner to identify. This will be similar to what we do currently on many assessments, with the addition of a variety of question types. The test can be taken at any stage in the assessment process, although it is recommended that it's completed prior to the practical and the project and guided discussion. The practical project, now this is a new approach to assessment, but it uses many similar approaches we have used in different previous assessments. When we consider design type assessments and practicals with supporting evidence, such as materials lists, so whilst it's a new title, the approach will be familiar. The project is externally set and internally marked and externally quality assured. The project has 3 elements: the planning, the performing, and evaluating. And the learner will have 14 hours allocated for the planning of all the 3 tasks. They then have 40 hours allocated to carry out and perform the 3 tasks. And finally, 6 hours to carry out and evaluate all the 3 tasks in the project. The learner will not be able to use the time they have been given for each element for another element. For example, if they complete their planning in 12 hours, they may not use the other 2 hours for either the performing or the evaluating elements. The learner will be required to devise plans for all 3 tasks, showing the approach they will take to undertake the work required in the tasks, underpinned by an overall schedule of works. Once the task has been completed, they will be required to evaluate their work, and they must adhere to all relevant health and safety rules and procedures at all times. The planning tasks will be undertaken in a classroom environment, where they will have access to IT equipment and appropriate resources to carry out their research. These materials may include guidance notes, regulations, and manufacturer's instructions/literature. Questions that they could well ask themselves is, what does a good build or installation look like in my trade area? And how can I achieve this? By asking themselves these questions will help them start to think about the design and how they're going to evaluate the tasks moving forward. Requirements for the performing element can be found in section 3 of the practical project guide, which will contain project briefs for each trade. If the learner completes in less time, as we've mentioned previously, they cannot use the extra time in the other elements of this project, or take time from other elements to add time here. Once learners have completed the performing element of the project, they must produce one evaluation report which reflects on the whole project and includes all the 3 tasks. Again, this will be undertaken in a classroom environment under supervision from centre staff, ensuring learners have access to their planning documentation to support their review and evaluation. With regards to the marking of the planning, the performing and the evaluation, there is a marking grid located within the assessment pack to be used for each element. And we will be taking a deeper dive into the marking grid in future dedicated sessions. So please look out for future webinars and possibly face-to-face sessions should restrictions reduce in future. I'm now going to take you through an example of a project, and first of all we'll start with the solid plastering. Before I would like to start, we have taken on board concerns that have been raised regarding the height of the tasks, and the measurements are being amended to read a minimum of 2.2 meters to minimize not just only cost, but also ensure working safely within a college environment. Here we can see an example of the practical project that provides an assessment brief. This is to try and make the assessment as realistically as we possibly can and prepare the learner. Whichever pathway a learner is working towards, the assessment is made up of 3 tasks. Task 1 is the rendering activity, and there's 20 hours, and it's a guided of 20 hours being allocated to the rendering activity. Task 2, and the specification is to apply a 2-coat internal plaster with 10 hours allocated. And task 3 is again a specification, but this time it's install plasterboard to ceiling and bulkhead and apply finish with 10 hours allocated. Tasks allocated to each of the 3 tasks in the element of the performing has got to total no more than 40 hours. And how them 40 hours are divided up can depend on each activity that the learner will take. The sample assessments will be available, as we've mentioned earlier, from the Skills for Wales website, week commencing the 10th of May. So please, when you have the opportunity from the 10th of May, please take a look, and then you'll be able to see for yourselves the more in-depth detail and the exact drawings that they'll be working towards. But these are only examples, and what we will be having is in September, when you start the progression of the foundation, they'll be for your eyes only and not for the learners, the project for the following year, which will help you to plan accordingly with the materials that you will require. So here we can see the slide showing you an example of a dry lining project. And once again, as we mentioned earlier, the measurements have been amended to read a minimum of 2.2 to ensure the cost and working safely within the college environment. So the 3 tasks and the assignment brief are as follows. Task 1, install wall lining and form a bulkhead, and 20 hours is allocated. Install suspended metal furring ceiling system, 10 hours allocated. And finally, fix plasterboard, which is task 3, to a masonry background by direct bond, and fix plasterboard by mechanical means. And again, there's 10 hours allocated to this. Whichever pathway the learner is working towards, they will have to complete what you can see on the left of the screen, the materials list, tools and equipment that will be required. There will be an overview materials list for the centre to help plan and prepare. But this, along with tools and equipment list, isn't to be shared with the learner, as they will make their own as part of their planning activity. The right-hand side of the slide shows the marking grid. This grid helps us to grade the learner as we use the tolerances to apply marks. And how we do this is 1 to 3 defects to gain marks between 1 to 3. This is an approach used in some previous qualifications, so tutors should be familiar. But if not, it's a fairly straightforward method and is similar to the approach on the Wales Skills competitions. The guided discussion is in 2 parts, and it's got to be completed in 1 timed session. It is internally marked and externally verified, and it's carried out in 40 minutes, with an additional 5 minutes can be allocated to complete their final question. This will explore the learner's knowledge within their chosen pathway. It will also explore their knowledge and understanding of self-employed in their chosen pathway. And it is recommended that a gap of no more than 3 weeks is left between the learner's finalisation of their project and completion of their guided discussion. Moving forward, we will take a deeper dive into the guided discussions as an assessment method in future dedicated sessions. So once again, please look out for future webinars and possibly face-to-face sessions should restrictions reduce in future. Just to let you know that we will be running 2 pilot events to ensure that the presentations are correct in the format that we're looking to do. We have already had 3 colleges put their names forward, so you may already have an insight into some of these presentations. But that's not to say that you do not attend the main ones once they start in September, October time, because they will be amended accordingly to suit whatever feedback we receive from the pilot presentations we will be running. To complete this section of the presentation, I'd like to go through now an overview of the assessments we have briefly covered for the progression qualification. Learners will receive provisional grades for the assessments within 1 week of completion. Qualifications will undergo internal and external quality assurance, and the final grading will be issued by City and Guilds. It's worth noting the slight change in procedure to current qualifications, and this is to enable us, City and Guilds, to quality assure and calculate the grading based on results across all 3 assessments. If a learner fails to successfully achieve a pass grade in any of the assessments, then they are permitted to resit or resubmit. And there are no limits to the number of assessments or reassessments that can take place. However, time may become an issue as learners will require further training and reinforcement prior to further attempts. I would now like to pass you back to David, who will take you through the next items on the agenda. Thank you for now.
Thank you very much, Ian. We're going to move on now and have a look at the resources. You may have seen some of this supporting information in previous webinars, but I'll quickly cover some of this again as a recap and for those who may not have seen it before. Firstly, to help with the initial setup, our resource document gives an overview of requirements to deliver and offer the qualifications. Please access this document in your planning meetings to help answer some of those questions that you might have quite often when you sat down chatting and looking at resources and staffing and so on. We've also got a prospectus, which is a document I really like and helps support centres create their own promotional literature and helps provide information for learners, parents and employers. I also think it's a good document to help with staff to get an overview of some of the qualifications. So as we move on, we see an exemplar of our adaptable delivery planner. We do have a blank version, as it's likely that each centre will consider delivery differently, such as the duration you run each unit and when you build in your practicals. The planner has a row for you to input your units and then the weeks to tick off as you work through the content of each unit. To support your CPD, moving on, sorry Ian, to the next slide. To support your CPD, we will be releasing a quarterly newsletter with links to various opportunities to engage with learning experiences. These may be links dedicated to videos on new manufacturers, news, information, and so on. We're also creating a resource section on the Skills for Wales website to collate learning resources from third parties such as providers and centres. We'll also link to relevant courses from trade and industry bodies such as CITB, CIPHE, NFB, various e-learning, and so on. So this next slide shows some of the dates you can expect to see materials start to filter out. So the new tutor resources and CPD resources are starting to filter out from now. As with any development, there's so much to develop, not everything becomes available on the same day. So you will see this start to come out more and more over the coming months. Delivery and the assessment guidance from September 21 and the employer CPD materials from April. And what you can see on this slide now is some of the links to the new tutor resources. So these have been offered for review. So if you haven't seen any of these so far, if you want to see some draft versions, then drop us an email. But they are becoming available now. So we're at the closing stages of creation of some of these. But it's a typical support material that you've probably seen before, such as presentations, question papers, worksheets, typical support for delivery of the qualifications. We also have a dedicated foundation book created by Hodder Education to support delivery and learning across all 6 core units. There is a sample chapter which can be accessed through the link on the slide when it's shared. So although that's the foundation, it will support with that qualification. We're to talk about the progression today, but leading on from this, you will see that Hodder are creating free mapping documents into the current trade-specific textbooks, so they can continue to be used with the new suite of qualifications. So now let's move on and have a look at our next steps. Here we can see several key dates. A couple I'd like to highlight are the overview of teaching and learning webinars, which are planned or we're in the process of planning for next month, with some follow-up sessions, hopefully face-to-face, when we're next allowed to, hopefully next academic year. And the go live and first teaching for September 2021, so not too far away now. So it's quite important you work with your own centres to see which qualifications are being delivered from September and help prepare yourselves and your learners to deliver the new qualifications if you're moving over this year. It's not far away, September. It's not too far away. So moving on now to the transition requirements, which have been discussed before, and Qualification Wales have run webinars on these, which are available to view. But let's have a brief recap. A learner completing a broad level 1 qualification this year, it's suggested, could progress onto the foundation. Someone completing a trade-specific level 1 may progress to the foundation or progression. This would depend on the suitability of the learner to go into the progression at that stage. A learner completing level 2 trade-specific this year may progress to the progression or the level 3 trade-specific. There are also other options, and we suggest you consider this diagram when considering suitable destinations for learners. It's worthwhile printing this off, having this with you when you're looking at your planning for 2021 and beyond. The next slide then shows us the journey for learners starting in the following academic year, 2022, showing the broad level 1 and foundation as suitable starting points and the new apprenticeship for learners who are employed. This diagram, I feel, looks a lot more simplistic, and that's because we've moved to the full suite of new qualifications. So our next slide, we can see some of the future and current webinars that we're working through. Please always try and keep yourself updated and register for suitable webinars. We always recommend that staff register, even if you're not too sure you can make it on the day, because once registered, you will be sent a link to the recording within 24 hours automatically from the system. This saves you having to search for links and episodes shortly after if you're hoping to gain access to the recording. It just makes it a little bit easier. So we do have a few slides left, but what we're going to do now, we're just going to pause to take questions. So whilst you're thinking of those questions, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Anne Harrod for opening up and to Ian for delivering the main part of this presentation, and to Ian also for pulling together all this information to present to you today. It's a lot of work from various sources to bring it all into one place. So thank you, Ian, for supporting with the development of this presentation. For your questions, please use the questions tab on the right hand side of your panel. You should be able to click on the questions tab and type in any questions you have. They don't have to be a direct question. You know, we're here to help you today. You're taking precious time out of your delivery and your time that you have to support and deliver to learners. We want to make it as valuable as we possibly can for you. So it may just be some topics that you want to discuss, some concerns you might have. Is there something on the presentation we've delivered you didn't quite understand, you want us to recap on or go back over? We're conscious there's a lot to take in, a lot of changes. Please share your concerns or anything you like. There may be some things that you think are going really well, something that you'd like us to just share some of your thoughts, maybe not a question. So please do share the positive, the good, as well as some things you may have some concerns and queries on. But whilst you're maybe finding the questions tab or thinking of those topics, there are a couple of things I'd like to ask Ian, because there's been quite a few questions come up on different topics in the past, hasn't there, Ian? And some of those we can maybe just go into a little bit now. So we've spoke briefly about the 3 core units. Would you be able to just share some thoughts as to how they came about and the benefit to learners of some of those core content, please, Ian?
Yes, no problem, David. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining today, especially we understand how difficult it is with the times and workload you've currently got. As we've mentioned earlier, going through the particular units, following on from the review, it was clearly identified that the learners needed more clarity on the actual construction industry itself. So when you're looking at certain units like 201, employment and employability in the construction centre, it's not just trying to encourage the learners to come into the industry, but also to encourage them what opportunities are once you get into the industry to be able to move on. Site management, for example, site agent, site foreman, and things like that. But it's also to have a good knowledge and understanding of also the becoming self-employed. So if you decided to become self-employed, how can they move that forward and work forward accordingly? But on top of that, we've also got Unit 202, which is the changing practices over time. Excuse me, because there's a lot of people at the moment, a lot of construction employers at the moment working on pre-1919 buildings. So it's crucial that learners have a good knowledge and understanding of how they can and what materials they actually use on these types of materials to maintain it as it should be. Because as we all know, if you don't maintain them in the correct way and use the correct materials, it can have the adverse effect to certain buildings and cause more problems and experience difficulties for the client themselves. But it's not just about pre-1919 buildings, it's also about moving forward, new technologies, off-site manufacturing, on-site manufacturing. How can that take place? When you're looking at 3D modeling, when you're looking at building information and modeling, and drones, how can that affect and take place? Although you may think, well, why does that really involve, our particular pathways? We've got to try and encourage learners as well to be able to open their horizon, so they've got other opportunities, so they know what the other opportunities are there for, and that is crucial. And then the last one, which is Unit 203, which I believe is really crucial, is that what we have got to do is about the planning and evaluating work in the construction sector, but in Wales. So then we can understand what the environment and what the industry is like in Wales. So it's specific to Wales as well as, and that is crucial because it's also ensuring about the quality of work, maintaining that. How could they evaluate the type of work that they're carrying it out? Is it carried out accordingly? And that again is the crucial. So that's why the three core units are there. And when you look at them, apart from some of the elements built in or some of the criteria built into the core units, we have delivered some of it previously, but there's a considerable change within them three core units. And this is something as well where tutors may need just do a bit of research, update their own knowledge accordingly, or CPD, like David's mentioned, the CPD newsletter that comes out, like yourselves. Me, for example, I'll be going on more onto the heritage so I can upskill my knowledge and understanding of it, because I've already looked to sign up to the Tywey Centre in Carmarthenshire and the type of heritage short courses that they're offering. So you're not on your own if you've got to do additional research and CPD. We're all in the same boat, if you like, because we've all got to ensure that we make that, ensure we transfer the knowledge and skills that learner requires to be able to move forward into the industry that Wales is requiring. I hope that answers your question, David.
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much, Ian. Really insightful into how we got to where we are and the purpose and hopefully the benefit to the learners and to the delivery network of the new changes. So there's no new questions coming up, Ian. What I suggest we do is we do have a couple of slides left. We can cover those two slides and then we can double back and have a look and check that there's no further questions. We've got plenty of time left. We're happy to stay on answering all questions that you may have or covering topics again. We can even unmute you. There's not large numbers on because we've spread out these webinars. We've not got the massive numbers, so we're able to control unmuting people, and so you can ask questions verbally as well if you prefer. Please just drop a line in the questions tab. But we'll quickly cover the last couple of slides. One's a call out really. Feedback's always important, and you're always being asked lately for feedback from various sessions that you attend. I know I do, and Ian and Harrod does as well. But it's really important with this because it's quite unique that the development of this qualification suite has been done alongside the presentations and webinars and previously face-to-face meetings with providers. So that means that there's more ownership from the full delivery network, and we've kept you up to date as we're progressing with it. And you've been able to input at certain sections, and that input has been very, very valuable to us. Sometimes we can make some changes, sometimes we can't. That's just the nature of development, really. But the input really helps us create our support for you. So it's not just input into the qualification, but it's what you like about support. Do you like these webinars? Do you prefer face-to-face? What has gone well for us in the past? Please support us with that as much as you can. And our final slide.
I think we may just have lost David for the moment. As final slide is just to, if you have any further queries, any questions, please don't hesitate. Here you can see the Skills for Wales.customer@cityandguilds.com. Any further questions or any queries at all, please don't hesitate to email that address, because what we'd like to try and do is collect as much information as we can collectively, and then we can share it amongst the consortium. But if you've anything you'd like to just email me or David, then please by all means do so. Don't hesitate at all. Don't hesitate at all. But what we'd really like to say is really appreciate you giving us the time, opportunity to join us, especially in your busy schedules you've got at this moment in time. So we'd just like really to thank you very much for listening and for your questions. And we'd wish you a very good day and all the best for the rest of the day. And whatever you do, please take care. So thank you for joining.
Thank you, Ian. Apologies. Can you hear me now?
We can now, David, yes.
I apologise. I don't know why it dropped out. Technology, that sometimes happens. But you've picked it up perfectly there, Ian. So thank you for that. And yeah, thanks for your attendance today. And we look forward to seeing your comments and feedback and picking up on some of the points that you would like to share. So just to reiterate what Ian has already said, enjoy the rest of your day, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you and goodbye.